Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room buzzed with low chatter, boots scraping tile, laughter bouncing off the steel walls. The kind of laughter that came from people who hadn't yet learned what silence could cost. Haley Brooks sat at the far end, quiet, careful, unwrapping the bandage around her wrist. The movement was slow, deliberate, like she was peeling back more than just fabric. A faint black line of ink revealed itself beneath her skin. Faded, imperfect, almost erased by time. It wasn't pretty, not symmetrical, not meant to be seen. But it was there, a memory carved into her flesh. Across the room, 3 recruits noticed. Kyle Martinez leaned back in his chair, a grin stretching across his face. "What's that?" he said loud enough for the others to hear. "Some cheap mall tattoo." Haley didn't look up. Rivers laughed, a sharp, quick sound. "You get that at a strip mall or something. That's adorable." The laughter spread like wildfire. Boots stomped, chairs squeaked. Haley just pulled her sleeve back down, hiding the mark again. She didn't answer because she didn't need to. Some things didn't deserve words. That's when the door opened. Commander Merrick entered, the kind of man whose presence silenced a room before he said a single word. His face was all angles and scars, his posture the kind that told you he'd carried weight most men couldn't imagine. "Today's training session will." He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had caught her wrist. For a long moment, the air seemed to vanish. Then the grizzled SEAL straightened his spine and snapped a crisp, perfect salute. Every sound in the room died. Haley didn't move, didn't blink. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she returned the salute. Nobody knew why. Nobody dared to ask. That moment, that single act split the room in two. Those who laughed, and those who realized something was happening far beyond their understanding. Haley Brooks was 29, mechanic turned reconnaissance pilot. A quiet precision defined her, the kind that came from surviving places where noise got you killed. She'd always been more comfortable with machines than people. Helicopter rotors, radio static, the click of tools, that was her language. She learned early that silence wasn't weakness, it was armor. Before this program, before the integration experiment that threw pilots, divers, and coastal operators together in one boiling pot of ego and competition, she'd belonged to something else. Something that officially didn't exist anymore. Valkyrie Reconnaissance. Most recruits didn't even know that unit was real, and those who did spoke of it in half-whispers. It had been disbanded 2 years ago, its missions classified, its records sealed, its members scattered to the wind. Now here she was again, back in uniform, at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility, where salt air clung to sweat and the sound of waves blended with orders barked through megaphones. The California coast looked beautiful from a distance, but up close, it was a battlefield of mud, sweat, and steel. Each morning began before dawn, the cold air biting through fatigues. Obstacle courses carved the landscape like scars. Sand pits, climbing walls, boat carries, pain turned into ritual. Haley didn't complain, she wrote. A small notebook lived in her cargo pocket, her own mechanical scripture. Equipment specs, gear loadouts, maintenance routines, even notes on teammates' habits. She treated it like a mission log, not a diary. And maybe that was what made her stand out. Not in the way she wanted. The trio, Kyle, Rivers, and Dempsey, had made her their target from day one. Kyle was the loud one, a former college football player with too much swagger and not enough self-awareness. Rivers was quieter but sharper, his words chosen like knives. Dempsey just followed, a shadow looking for approval. "She's not SEAL material," Kyle said one afternoon, voice loud enough to carry across the mess hall. "They're just filling quotas now. Anybody with a heartbeat gets a spot." The laughter that followed was ugly. Haley didn't respond. She turned a page in her notebook, underlining a word: discipline. That small tattoo on her wrist, that was their favorite weapon. They'd whisper about it during PT, snicker during gear checks, mock it during training runs. To them, it was weakness. To her, it was memory. Chief O'Hara noticed it too. He wasn't like the others. 30 years in the Navy, most of them as a medic, and he had that look, like he'd seen too many kids break before they even realized they were breaking. Sometimes, when he passed Haley in the corridor, his eyes lingered on her wrist. Not judgment, recognition. But he never said a word. The difference between ignorance and understanding was often silence. It happened again during lunch one Tuesday. The mess hall buzzed with the smell of coffee and sweat. Haley sat alone, reading a maintenance manual while spooning down a meal she barely tasted. Kyle swaggered over, Rivers and Dempsey trailing behind. "Hey, Ink Girl," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "What's that little scribble supposed to mean? Looks like something a drunk buddy gave you behind a diner." She didn't look up. She just reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out a folded, worn patch. Faded red and black, wings spread wide around a small insignia, the Valkyrie unit emblem. She set it beside her tray with quiet reverence. "Just trying to stay professional here," she said softly. But Kyle didn't stop. He grabbed a pen and scribbled on his hand, mocking her. "Look, guys, I'm mysterious and edgy too." Rivers laughed. Dempsey joined in. The sound cut through the air, but Haley simply stood, packed up her tray, and walked out. Silence followed her like a shadow. The harassment got worse after that. During morning PT, they carried boats across dunes, 6 men to a team, all muscle and coordination. Haley was small but steady. She never asked for help, never gave an inch. Kyle made sure to make her life harder. "Remember," he said loudly, "we're only as strong as our weakest link." When the boat shifted, he'd accidentally throw more weight her way. When she stumbled, Rivers would shake his head and mutter, "Can't even handle basic load. How's she supposed to survive an op?" Their laughter was fuel. But it also told Haley something. They'd never been under real fire. Weapons training wasn't any kinder. Rivers checked his target after each drill. "Guess that tattoo's blocking her aim," he'd joke. "You get that to look tough." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. Her shots told the story, tight groupings, center mass every time. One instructor noticed, Lieutenant Ishan Markson. He was young, sharp, curious in the way officers sometimes are before the weight of command burns it out of them. During a break, he walked over while she cleaned her weapon with surgical precision. "That ink," he said, nodding to her wrist. "What's the story?" She looked up, her expression unreadable. "It's how I remember to keep moving forward, sir." "That's not what I asked." "That's all the answer I have, sir." He studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. Understood. But his eyes said he didn't. Not yet. That night the ocean roared louder than usual, a storm creeping toward the coast. The training compound's floodlights flickered in the mist. Haley sat alone in the hangar, wiping down a rotor blade that wasn't even scheduled for maintenance. Her reflection looked back at her in the metal, tired, steady, still. In the distance she could hear laughter again, familiar voices. She paused, hand hovering above the blade. Some lessons didn't need confrontation, they needed patience. Because one day, one mission, one moment, the same people who mocked you would look at you differently. They'd see what you'd been carrying all along. And when that happened, you wouldn't need to say a single word. You just stand there silent, steady, and let truth speak for itself. She reached up, rolling her sleeve just enough to see the faint ink beneath her skin. The characters looked faded under the cold light, but each one pulsed with memory. 12 names, 12 coordinates. Each one a story she couldn't tell. Not because she didn't want to, but because some memories didn't belong in the light. They belonged here, beneath the sleeve, against her pulse, where they stayed alive. The storm outside broke suddenly, wind slamming against the hangar doors. Thunder rolled across the coast like distant artillery. Haley closed her notebook, slid it into her pocket, and stood. Tomorrow would come. Another day, another drill, another round of jokes. But someday soon they would learn. Not because she'd teach them with words, but because she'd show them the way real warriors do. With silence, with grace, with proof. Rain came first as a whisper, then as a roar. By evening, the California sky had turned into a sheet of gray fire, lightning flickering over the Pacific, thunder shaking the walls of the training compound. Wind slammed against barracks doors, and the metallic scent of salt water drifted through the hallways. The recruits thought the storm meant a night off. They were wrong. An alert blared through the speakers, sharp and cold. All personnel assemble for briefing. Simulation Protocol Delta. Nobody liked hearing that code. Haley was already dressed when the others scrambled from bunks, pulling on wet gear and half-laced boots. Her movements were efficient: gloves, tactical vest, radio unit, all in order. She didn't look at anyone. Didn't need to. She'd already seen storms like this before, real ones. They filed into the briefing room, dripping water onto the floor. The air smelled of adrenaline and damp nylon. Instructors waited at the front: Lieutenant Markson, Chief O'Hara, and Commander Stone Merrick. The same Merrick who had once saluted her in silence. The recruits hadn't forgotten. They just didn't understand. Merrick's eyes swept across the group. Tonight's simulation replicates a live operation under compromised conditions. Rain, wind, zero visibility. Objective: infiltrate plant beacon, exfiltrate undetected. Failure equals requalification. Success earns clearance for advanced tactical modules. He paused. We need a team leader. Silence. No one wanted to volunteer. The exercise had a reputation, the kind that broke confidence and careers alike. Automated sentries patrolled the perimeter, searchlights cutting through sheets of rain. One mistake meant instant detection. Kyle stared at his boots. Rivers adjusted his gloves. Dempsey coughed into his fist. Haley raised her hand. "I'll take point," she said. Her voice was steady, without arrogance, without hesitation. Laughter followed, nervous, forced. Kyle turned, incredulous. You want someone with a strip mall tattoo leading us into a tactical op." "Maybe let the professionals handle this, Princess," Rivers added, smirking. Even Dempsey chuckled, though his eyes flickered uneasily toward Merrick. They didn't know that Merrick wasn't just watching, he was remembering. The air changed when he moved. The commander straightened, his scarred face unreadable. His gaze locked on Haley's wrist, where her sleeve had slipped just enough for that faint ink to show again. And then it happened, just like before. A perfect salute. No hesitation, no explanation. "Ma'am," he said quietly, but the word carried like thunder. The room went dead still. The laughter froze on Kyle's lips. Rivers blinked as if trying to understand what he'd just seen. Haley returned the salute with that same quiet precision, the same invisible gravity. Merrick's tone shifted, the kind that made even arrogance stand at attention. "Brooks will lead tonight's exercise. You will follow her orders as if they came from me. Questions?" No one spoke. The storm outside battered the walls harder, as if the ocean itself wanted to listen. 10 minutes later, the team gathered in the gear bay. The rain was relentless, pounding the roof like drumfire. Floodlights cast jagged shadows across the floor. Haley stood by the equipment table, laying out their gear one item at a time. Waterproof comms, check. Emergency flares, check. Tactical lights, red filters, check. Her voice didn't rise or fall. It was measured, deliberate, the way soldiers speak when they've seen what chaos really costs. Kyle finally spoke. "Look, I don't know what that salute thing was, but—" "You don't need to know," Haley interrupted, eyes never leaving her checklist. "You just need to follow orders. Can you do that?" Kyle swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. She nodded. Good, then listen carefully. She unfolded a waterproof map across the table. Beacon placement is here, North Pier, 400 meters from insertion point. Automated sentries sweep every 30 seconds, overlapping coverage. Standard approach gives us 40 seconds of exposure, too long. Rivers leaned over the map. So what's the plan? We go under the pier structure, she said. Use the support beams for cover. Tide, at its lowest, in 18 minutes. That gives us 30 centimeters of clearance beneath the beams. Dempsey frowned. How do you know that? Because I read the tide charts, she said without looking up, and because I've done this before. No one asked what this was. Minutes later, they launched into the storm. The inflatable boat pitched violently as waves hammered against the shore. Cold salt water stung their faces. Haley sat at the bow, paddle in hand, her posture calm, focused. Steady, she called out over the wind. Match the rhythm of the swells. 3 seconds between crests. Don't fight the water, work with it. Kyle missed a stroke, his paddle slapping the surface awkwardly. I can't see a damn thing, he shouted. Then listen instead of talking, Haley snapped. Count the seconds, feel the current, your eyes are useless, trust your other senses. Something in her tone, not anger, not impatience, but authority, settled the team. Their strokes fell into sync. The boat steadied. Lightning illuminated the dark silhouette of the pier ahead. Massive wooden supports rose from the churning water like ribs of some ancient beast. Searchlights swept in perfect patterns above them, mechanical predators scanning the storm. Down, Haley whispered. They flattened against the boat as a beam cut across the surface, heat brushing their skin. Kyle's breathing quickened, sharp and panicked. Control your breathing, she whispered. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Panic gets you killed. He followed her rhythm without realizing it. The pulse in his throat slowed. The world seemed to quiet. Under the pier, darkness swallowed them whole. Barnacle-covered beams loomed inches from their heads. The water surged and hissed, echoing strange patterns. Rivers cursed softly as his shoulder scraped a beam. How the hell are you navigating this? It's pitch black. Sound carries differently under structures, she murmured. Echo patterns tell you obstacles. Water movement tells you clearances. Count tells you distance. It wasn't bravado. It was knowledge carved into her bones. They followed her voice, calm, distant, guiding. Beam clearance 28 centimeters. Duck and keep moving. The storm outside was chaos, but inside that dark labyrinth there was order, her order. At the beacon site, she secured the device with precise movements. 2 minutes to spare, she said, checking her watch. Prepare for extraction. As they turned back, a searchlight swept toward them, faster than expected. Light incoming, Rivers hissed. Don't move, Haley commanded. The beam hit them dead on. 4 figures exposed, caught in white glare, nowhere to hide. Kyle held his breath, expecting alarms, sirens, the end of the exercise. But nothing happened. The light passed over them and moved on, as if they weren't even there. Dempsey stared. How did it not detect us? Haley kept paddling. Because camouflage isn't about being invisible, it's about being expected. Rain creates motion patterns on the surface. Automated sensors filter them out. If you stay still when the light hits, you become background noise. They made it back to shore with 30 seconds left on the clock. The mission was flawless. When they dragged the boat onto the sand, Kyle finally asked the question hanging in his chest. Where did you learn all that? Haley was already breaking down the gear. Her movements were mechanical, practiced. Same place I learned that some marks aren't decorations, she said quietly. They're reminders of who didn't make it home. No one spoke after that. Thunder rolled again, distant now, the storm starting to fade. Commander Merrick emerged from the observation tower, rain dripping from his cap. His expression was unreadable. Debrief in 10 minutes, he said. And gentlemen, his eyes shifted toward Kyle, Rivers, and Dempsey. I think it's time you learn what those characters on Brooks's wrist actually mean. The debrief room felt smaller than usual. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was the weight of realization pressing against the walls. Water pooled beneath their boots. The projector flickered to life, showing mission telemetry, but no one looked at it. Merrick stood in front of the display, hands behind his back, voice calm and heavy. The unit designation on Brooks's wrist belongs to Valkyrie Reconnaissance, Forward Operating Intelligence, disbanded 2 years ago after their final mission in the Gulf. Chief O'Hara stepped forward from the shadows, his weathered face solemn. I treated the wounded from that op, he said quietly. 12 operators went in, 4 came out. Kyle's throat tightened. Classified how? The kind of classified where families get folded flags, Merrick replied. And no answers. Rivers looked down at her wrist, his voice barely a whisper. That's not a tattoo. It's a memorial, Haley finished. Each character marks someone who didn't make it home. The coordinates mark where we lost them. Silence, not awkward, not empty, sacred. Dempsey's voice broke it, soft and ashamed. We didn't know. You didn't ask, she said. There was no anger in her tone, just truth. You saw ink and assumed vanity. You saw quiet and assumed weakness. You saw different and assumed lesser. Merrick's voice was steady. The techniques Brooks used tonight, those weren't simulations. They were based on real operational parameters, battlefield-tested survival. Kyle stepped forward. Ma'am, we owe you. Don't apologize, she said gently. Learn. From her pocket she produced 3 objects, a notebook, a checklist, a recorder. Martinez, you'll document stealth paddling techniques, turn it into a training protocol. Rivers, compile an equipment checklist for low-visibility ops. Dempsey, record an after-action report. Make tonight worth something. The recruits nodded. No longer boys in uniform, but soldiers in understanding. Merrick turned toward them, his voice low but certain. Effective immediately, Brooks is tactical advisor for all-night operations training. Her methods are not suggestions. They're doctrine. He paused, eyes sweeping the room. The military doesn't just teach you how to fight. It teaches you how to recognize honor when you see it, even when it doesn't look like what you expected. Outside, the rain had stopped. But inside, the storm had just passed through them all. Why did the silence feel heavier than gunfire? After the debrief, the others had left the room, boots echoing down the corridor, words caught somewhere between shame and respect. But Haley stayed. She sat alone under the dim light, her uniform soaked, her hands still trembling from the cold. Water dripped from her sleeve, pooling near her boots, but she didn't move. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind something quieter, something heavier. Commander Merrick stood near the door, arms crossed, watching her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. For a long while, the only sound was the hum of the overhead lights and the distant crash of waves beyond the walls. Finally, he broke the silence. They didn't know. Haley nodded once. I know. He stepped closer. And you didn't tell them. Would it have changed anything? Merrick's jaw tightened, then relaxed. Maybe not, but it might have saved you some grief. She looked up at him. Her eyes were steady, but behind them was a storm all her own. Respect that's handed to you isn't the same as respect that's earned. He nodded slowly, something like pride flickering in his expression. You sound like him. Her breath caught almost imperceptibly. Him. The one who led your last op, Merrick said softly. Your team leader, Major Ken Arden. The name hung in the air, a name that hadn't been spoken aloud in 2 years. Haley's throat felt dry. You knew him, she asked. Merrick gave a faint smile, the kind that carried both memory and loss. Everyone in our world knew him. The man had a way of walking into hell and making it look like a routine patrol. Haley exhaled, her voice quiet. He taught me everything I know about silence. Merrick nodded. He taught me the same. For a moment, the two of them just stood there, two survivors of different battles, bound by ghosts that still marched somewhere between them. Finally, Merrick turned to leave. Get some rest, Brooks. You've got command briefing at 0700, and good work tonight. She didn't respond. Because good work didn't feel right when the echoes of 12 names were still carved into her skin. When the door clicked shut, she leaned forward, elbows on knees, and whispered under her breath, not to anyone in particular. You'd have laughed at them too, Ken, the way they thought strength was loud. The storm outside had passed, but the night still hummed with its memory. Haley made her way back through the compound, the hallways empty except for the low buzz of security lights. The air was thick with the scent of sea salt and wet earth. Every sound, the distant metallic creak of flagpoles, the hiss of the ocean, carried through the stillness. Her quarters were small but neat. A single bed, a locker, a desk that doubled as a dining table, and a narrow window that framed the black horizon. She closed the door behind her, peeled off her wet uniform piece by piece, and set her sidearm on the nightstand. Then she sat, cross-legged on the bed, and reached under her pillow. The leather-bound notebook was there, the one no one else had ever seen. She opened it to a page that had been touched so many times the ink had started to fade. The page was titled only by a date, May 14, 2041. She traced a finger over the top line, then began writing in small, careful letters. Tonight, I remembered why silence matters. They thought the tattoo was for show. I didn't tell them they were laughing at a graveyard. She paused, the pen hovering midair. The wind rattled the window. I shouldn't blame them. They've never seen what I've seen. Her handwriting was small, almost mechanical, each word deliberate. Ken used to say, "The world judges by noise, but we fight for the quiet that comes after." Her eyes drifted to her wrist again. The ink looked darker under the lamplight. She ran her thumb over the tiny, faded symbols, numbers and letters that made no sense to anyone else. But to her, they were everything. 12 names, 12 coordinates. And one more space she could never bring herself to fill. Her own. She left it blank on purpose, a reminder that she was still here when others weren't, a reminder that survival wasn't victory, it was obligation. Outside, boots thudded past her door. She froze, voices. "Man, did you see her face when Merrick saluted? I thought I was hallucinating." That was Dempsey, nervous laugh. "Dude, I thought we were done for when she volunteered." "Yeah," Rivers said quietly, "we were idiots." Then Kyle's voice, softer than usual. "No, we were blind, there's a difference." Their footsteps faded down the hall. Haley let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Maybe she thought they were learning. She closed her notebook, slipped it back under her pillow, and reached for the patch on her nightstand. The old Valkyrie Recon emblem was frayed at the edges, its colors faded from sun and sand. She pressed it between her palms like a prayer. It still smelled faintly of oil and smoke. Her mind drifted, not to tonight's storm but to another one. A desert storm years ago. The kind that didn't bring rain, only fire. The sandstorm had swallowed everything. Visibility, zero, comms jammed, extraction compromised. Their convoy had been hit mid-transit, an ambush buried beneath the illusion of calm. Rockets streaked from dunes that looked like nothing but windswept hills. Haley had been the unit's recon pilot then, coordinating drone overwatch from a portable rig. 12 of them went in. 4 came out. The rest vanished in fire and static. She could still hear the radio that day. Ken's voice breaking through the noise, calm, composed as always. Valkyrie 1 steady silent, maintain comms discipline, eyes open. Then the explosion. The kind of sound that didn't just tear through the air, it tore through your life. When the smoke cleared, half the team was gone. Haley's drone had crashed. Her headset was full of screams and silence. She crawled through debris to drag two operators out, one breathing, one not. She never forgot the weight of the second, how heavy silence could be when it meant goodbye. They called it a mission failure. She called it a promise. To never forget. To carry what they couldn't. To move forward because they couldn't. That was when she inked the tattoo. Alone, in a field tent, trembling hands carving memory into skin. No fanfare, no meaning for anyone else, just a private map of loss, a way to keep 12 voices alive. When she came home, they disbanded Valkyrie, the files sealed, the names buried, and Haley, the quiet one, the survivor, simply disappeared into new assignments. Until tonight. The wind shifted outside her window, carrying the smell of wet concrete. Haley opened the curtain slightly. The compound lights shimmered through the mist, outlining the training grounds where tomorrow would start all over again. She pressed a hand against the glass. The reflection staring back at her didn't look heroic. It looked tired, haunted. But beneath the exhaustion was something else, resolve. Not anger, not bitterness, just the quiet strength of someone who'd already lost everything and still chose to serve. She turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness. For a while she sat there listening, the hum of the air vents, the low crash of waves, the faint creak of metal in the wind. Then she whispered, so softly the air barely carried it. Steady, silent. The same words she'd once heard over a dying radio, words that had become her anchor. When she finally lay back, sleep didn't come quickly. Because tomorrow wasn't about proving herself anymore. It was about protecting something bigger, the idea that honor doesn't need applause and sacrifice doesn't need witnesses. The storm had ended, but she knew another was coming. Not from the sky, from the system. From the same world that laughed at her tattoo and saluted it a few minutes later. And she was ready. Because she'd been through worse. Because she had names carved into her skin and ghosts carved into her soul. Because for every soldier who thought strength meant shouting, she was living proof that sometimes strength meant saying nothing at all. Outside, a single floodlight flickered, its reflection cutting across the waves. The bay slept, the sea kept moving. And somewhere deep in the quiet, a voice that wasn't hers whispered through memory, low, warm, steady. Good work, Brooks, you did what you had to. She smiled faintly in the dark. Not yet, she whispered back, but I will. Because some battles don't end when the shooting stops. They end when the silence finally teaches you who you are. Why did the morning feel quieter than usual? The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean but hollow. The California coastline shimmered beneath a pale, bruised sunrise, clouds hanging low like ghosts too tired to leave. The training compound was still slick with rain, puddles glinting across the asphalt like scattered mirrors. Haley Brooks walked across the courtyard with her usual measured stride, neither fast nor slow, just steady. Her uniform was crisp, her expression unreadable. The faint smell of salt and damp steel clung to everything. A few heads turned as she passed, not out of mockery this time, out of something closer to respect, maybe even guilt. Kyle Martinez, Rivers, and Dempsey stood near the obstacle course, already in gear. They looked different now, posture tighter, voices lower, the rough edges dulled overnight. They nodded as she walked by. No jokes, no laughter, just acknowledgement. Haley didn't nod back. Respect wasn't a currency she traded lightly. Inside the main hall, Commander Merrick and Lieutenant Markson were waiting. A projector hummed behind them, its light casting pale colors on the wall. Merrick looked up when she entered. "Brooks," he said simply, "at ease." She remained standing, hands behind her back. Markson spoke next, eyes darting between data on his tablet. Last night's operation was recorded and reviewed by Tactical Command. Your leadership under live storm conditions met every criterion for command qualification. Commander Merrick's recommendation has been approved. Haley blinked once, waiting. Merrick stepped forward. Effective immediately, you're assigned as tactical instructor for NITOPS training. You'll oversee all stealth, navigation, and reconnaissance modules for the next rotation. Her voice was quiet but firm. Understood, sir. Markson's tone softened. You earned this, Brooks, whether you wanted it or not. Haley's lips twitched into something that almost looked like a smile. Permission to speak freely. Granted. Respect isn't earned in a night, sir. It's tested in the dark. Merrick's jaw flexed, his eyes narrowing with something like approval. Then I suggest you start testing. Outside, the compound was stirring back to life. The sun had broken through, burning away fog, and with it came the low rhythm of training, the thud of boots, the clang of steel, the bark of orders. But beneath it all, something had changed. Word of the salute, the mission, and the debrief had spread. Every new recruit knew her name now. Some looked at her with awe, some with uncertainty, a few with envy. That last group worried her most. Because envy was just ignorance with ambition. Later that morning, she met her new class, 6 recruits fresh out of orientation, wide-eyed and loud, the kind who still thought courage came from volume. All right, she said, voice carrying just enough authority to cut through chatter. You'll call me Brooks, not ma'am, not instructor, just Brooks. They exchanged glances, confused. The mission's simple, she continued. Night infiltration under simulated fog and wind, equipment inspection in 10, movement drills after that, questions. One recruit, a tall one with buzzed hair and that same grin Kyle once wore, raised his hand. Ma'am, sorry, Brooks, why do we have to run stealth ops in broad daylight first? Because daylight shows your mistakes, she said evenly. Darkness just hides them. A few smirked. She didn't mind, they'd learn. They always did. As the morning went on, the drills began. She moved among them quietly, adjusting stances, correcting grips, reminding them that precision mattered more than power. Her presence was unsettling to them, not because she shouted, but because she didn't. Silence demanded attention. When one recruit stumbled during rope ascent, she simply held out her hand. He hesitated, then took it, expecting a lecture. Instead, she pulled him up with one arm, steady as stone. Try again, she said. He did. By noon, the class was exhausted, soaked in sweat and confusion. She hadn't raised her voice once, but somehow, they were already listening harder than they ever had before. That's when Lieutenant Markson returned, clipboard in hand. Commander wants a word, he said. Now. Haley nodded, handed her stopwatch to one of the recruits, and followed him toward the command building. The hall smelled of coffee and rain. Inside the briefing room, Merrick stood by a tactical map covered in red markings. His expression was darker than usual. Sit, he said. She did. He pointed to a set of coordinates. You recognize this? Haley leaned closer. Her heart stopped for a second. It was a desert grid, familiar, the lines of topography forming a pattern she hadn't seen since Valkyrie. Her throat tightened. Yes, sir. Merrick's eyes softened. Satellite scans picked up debris there last week, drone fragments, old tech. Markings matched the Valkyrie drones from your last mission. The room felt suddenly smaller. Merrick continued. Command wants a recovery team sent to verify. It's likely nothing, sandstorms shift all kinds of debris, but they requested someone who knows that terrain. Haley's hands curled slightly. They want me to go back. Merrick nodded. You'll lead the recon, 2-person team, no combat engagement, in and out. She didn't answer. The sound of wind outside filled the silence. Finally, she said, Who's the second? Kyle Martinez, Merrick replied. You earned his respect. Let's see if he can earn yours. The words hit harder than she expected. She looked down at her wrist, the ink barely visible in the sunlight streaming through the window. 2 years she'd avoided that desert. 2 years pretending she didn't hear their voices in her sleep. 2 years hiding scars that never healed. And now she was going back. They left that evening. The transport chopper roared above the compound, blades slicing through the golden sky. Haley sat across from Kyle, both strapped into harnesses, helmets on, goggles resting against their brows. Kyle glanced at her, uncertain. I appreciate the chance to come." Haley didn't look at him. "It's not a chance, Martinez. It's a responsibility." He nodded awkwardly. "Still, thank you for last night, for not giving up on us." She turned her gaze toward the fading horizon. "I wasn't doing it for you." He didn't ask who for. The flight was long and silent. The farther they flew, the more the world below turned to sand and shadow. By dusk, they landed near the coordinates, an endless stretch of dunes glowing under a dying sun. The heat was fading, replaced by the chill that came when deserts remembered their loneliness. The debris was scattered across a shallow ridge, twisted metal half buried in sand, bleached by sun and time. Haley approached slowly, her boots sinking slightly with each step. Kyle followed, careful not to disturb the wreckage. "Looks like drone parts," he murmured, "but old, real old." Haley knelt, brushing away layers of sand until a faded marking appeared. A serial number. She traced it with her glove. V04C, her voice cracked on the letters. "Valkyrie Unit 4, confirmed." Kyle crouched beside her. "That was your op." Her eyes were distant, lost in a memory he couldn't see. "Not just mine." She reached deeper into the wreckage and pulled out a small metal tag, half buried, edges corroded. The engraving was faint but legible. Arden K. Her breath hitched, the air seemed to vanish. She turned it over in her hand, thumb brushing the letters, and whispered, "You always said you'd find a way to come home." Kyle lowered his head, unsure what to say. "He was your commander, mentor, a pause, friend." The wind picked up, sweeping sand across the debris like a shroud. For a long while they said nothing. The desert didn't demand words, it demanded memory. Finally, Haley stood, looking out at the horizon where night was bleeding into orange. "This place was supposed to stay buried," she murmured. "Maybe that's what he wanted." Kyle stepped forward. "Then why did they send you back?" She gave a faint, sad smile. "Maybe to remind me that healing doesn't mean forgetting." They collected what they could, a few metal fragments, a scorched data chip, the tag. Then they stood in silence, facing the endless expanse of sand. Haley reached into her vest and pulled out her notebook. From the back pocket, she tore a blank page and placed it gently atop the wreckage. With her pen, she wrote only 3 words. "Steady, silent home." Then she placed the tag on top and stepped back. The wind lifted the edges of the paper, but didn't take it. Kyle's voice was quiet. "What now?" "Now," she said, turning toward the horizon, "we make sure the next generation doesn't need memorials to remember what honor looks like." He nodded slowly, and for the first time she saw something new in him, understanding. They walked back toward the chopper in silence. The desert glowed behind them, the last light of the sun setting fire to the sand. When they lifted off, Haley looked down through the window. The wreckage was already disappearing beneath drifting dunes, as if the desert itself was closing the chapter for her. She whispered a final goodbye, one the wind carried into the silence. Not everything needed to be said out loud. Not every story needed to end with noise. Some ended exactly like this, quietly, gracefully, at peace. The horizon blurred into night, the chopper banking east toward home. Haley leaned back in her seat, her eyes on the stars now breaking through the dark. Somewhere out there beyond the black, she imagined 12 souls finally at rest. And for the first time in years, the silence around her didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Why did peace feel heavier than war? The flight back to base was quiet. The rhythmic chop of the helicopter blades filled the air like a heartbeat, steady, unrelenting. Outside the small window, the desert stretched endlessly beneath the night, the stars sharp against the dark sky. Haley sat still, her helmet resting on her lap, the metal tag pressed between her gloved hands. The engraved letters Arden, K, caught the faint red glow of the cabin lights. Kyle sat across from her, trying not to stare. He could see the way her jaw clenched every few seconds, like she was holding back an ocean. He wanted to say something, anything, but every word he thought of felt small. Finally, he said the only thing that seemed honest. He must have meant a lot to you. Haley didn't look up. He did. Kyle waited, but she didn't continue. He realized then that silence for her wasn't avoidance. It was respect. When they landed, the base was half asleep, a handful of night personnel moving under dim floodlights, their voices soft in the cool coastal air. The storm had long since passed, leaving the ground slick but calm. Haley stepped off the helicopter first. She handed the recovered data chip to a waiting tech officer, gave a short debrief, and walked away before anyone could ask questions. Commander Merrick watched her from the edge of the hangar. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes followed her until she disappeared down the corridor toward her quarters. Kyle approached him, saluting stiffly. "Mission complete, sir." Merrick returned the gesture. "Good work, Martinez. How'd she handle it?" Kyle hesitated. She wasn't there for the mission, more like she was there to make peace with something. Merrick nodded slowly. She was. He didn't explain further, and Kyle didn't ask. Morning came quietly. The air smelled of salt and diesel. A soft fog rolled over the compound, diffusing the rising sun into muted gold. Haley stood on the training field, stopwatch in hand, watching her recruits move through stealth drills. Their movements were clumsy, uncertain, but she didn't interrupt. Mistakes were their own kind of teacher. Rivers passed by the field, clipboard under his arm. "Heard about the recon," he said, stopping beside her. "That must have been hard." She didn't answer. He exhaled through his nose. "You know the guys, me, Kyle Dempsey, we've been talking about everything. We're working on a proposal, training reforms, to make sure recruits understand what those markings mean, the memorials, the histories, the reasons behind the silence." Haley glanced at him. "You don't need to justify respect, Rivers, you just live it." He nodded. "We know, but some people still need help seeing what it looks like." She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Then make them see." Before he could respond, Lieutenant Markson appeared from the far side of the field. "Brooks," he called, his tone formal. "Command wants you in briefing room 3. Her posture didn't change, but the look in her eyes did. "What's it about?" "Protocol review," Markson said, though his tone suggested he didn't quite believe that himself. She handed the stopwatch to a nearby recruit and walked toward the main building, boots thudding softly against the damp ground. The briefing room was smaller than most, windowless and sterile, fluorescent lights casting everything in hard white. 3 senior officers sat at the table: Commander Merrick, Captain Royce from Tactical Command, and an operations analyst she didn't recognize. Royce gestured for her to sit. "Brooks, thank you for coming. We've reviewed your recent mission report and operational methods." Haley took her seat back straight. "Understood, sir." Royce leaned forward. "Your tactics, particularly during the storm simulation, deviate from standard naval procedure. You teach based on field improvisation, correct?" "Yes, sir, based on real operational parameters." "And these parameters come from the disbanded Valkyrie Recon Unit." Her jaw tightened. "Yes, sir." Royce nodded slowly. "That's what concerns us. Valkyrie missions were classified. Their methods weren't intended for instructional use." Merrick spoke before she could. "With respect, Captain, Her method saved an entire training unit last week. The results speak for themselves. Royce didn't look at him. That may be, Commander, but regulations exist for a reason. Unauthorized doctrine, even effective doctrine, risks undermining chain of command. Haley met his gaze evenly. With respect, sir, soldiers don't die because they followed orders. They die because they weren't prepared for what those orders couldn't predict. The analyst scribbled something on his tablet. The scratching sound filled the silence. Royce's voice was cool. That sounds dangerously close to insubordination. Merrick's eyes flicked to Haley. He didn't stop her. She took a slow breath. No, sir, it's observation. When I teach them to listen to silence, I'm not teaching rebellion. I'm teaching survival. Royce's expression didn't change, but something in the air did, a flicker of uncertainty, quickly hidden behind authority. Finally, he said, your position as tactical instructor stands, but command will be sending an observer to audit your training sessions, effective immediately. Merrick bristled. That's unnecessary. It's protocol, Royce said flatly. Dismissed. Haley stood, saluted, and walked out. Merrick followed her into the corridor. You handled that better than I would have. She shrugged. You get used to being misunderstood, sir. He almost smiled. You shouldn't have to. She looked down at her wrist. Maybe not, but some things are worth being misunderstood for. The observer arrived that afternoon. A young woman, early 30s, clean uniform, eyes that measured everything. She introduced herself simply as Captain Adrian Cole. Haley met her on the training field. The recruits were midway through low-visibility navigation exercises, crawling under fog and moving between markers with infrared beacons. Cole stood beside her, arms folded. Your training reports say you emphasize intuition over procedure. I emphasize awareness, Haley corrected. Procedure's a tool. Awareness keeps you alive. Cole watched for a while. You don't shout. Most instructors use command presence. I don't need to, Haley said. Fear, a poor teacher. Cole said nothing, but Haley could feel her eyes studying every movement, every word. When the exercise ended, the recruits gathered around. Panting, mud streaked across their faces. Haley gestured toward the field. What did you notice? One recruit answered, visibility's unpredictable under fog. Another said, sound carries weirdly. I could hear them breathing but not see them. Haley nodded. Good, and what did you learn about yourself? Silence. Finally, the youngest recruit, a woman with freckles and shaking hands, spoke softly. That I panic when I can't see what's coming. Haley's tone gentled. Then next time don't try to see, try to feel. Darkness doesn't lie, it just waits for you to stop fighting it. Cole's expression softened, just a fraction. When the session ended, the recruits dispersed to clean up. Cole stayed behind, arms still crossed. You don't teach like anyone I've met, she said quietly. I'm not like anyone you've met, Haley replied. Cole hesitated. You lost people. Haley's gaze drifted toward the horizon. Everyone in this line of work loses people. The question is what you do with what's left. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the distant sound of waves. Cole's voice was almost a whisper. I read the report, the Valkyrie mission. Haley didn't respond. Cole continued, my brother was on that task force. He didn't make it back. Haley turned sharply. Cole's eyes glistened. I wanted to hate the survivors. I thought maybe they failed him. But now, she swallowed hard. Now I think he was lucky to have someone like you out there. Haley said nothing, just nodded once, the kind of nod that carried more truth than comfort ever could. Cole took a step back, regaining her composure. For what it's worth, she said, I'll tell command what I saw today, not just your methods, your meaning. Haley's reply was quiet, steady. Thank you. As Cole walked away, Haley's gaze followed her until she disappeared down the path. The sky above the compound was clearing again, the fog thinning, sunlight breaking through in fractured beams. The recruits' laughter echoed faintly in the distance, light and genuine this time. For the first time in a long while, Haley allowed herself to exhale. Not in relief, in release. Because the ghosts she carried weren't leaving, but they were changing. They no longer whispered of loss. They reminded her of purpose. That night, as the base settled into its routine hum, Haley sat by her window again, the same desk, the same worn notebook. She flipped to a blank page and began to write. Leadership isn't about noise, it's about resonance. Respect isn't about titles, it's about trust that doesn't need to be spoken. She paused, listening to the rhythm of the waves outside. I thought silence was armor, maybe it's actually a bridge. Her hand hovered for a moment before adding one final line. Sometimes the strongest voice in the room is the one that refuses to shout. She closed the notebook gently. Outside, the ocean breathed against the shore. And for the first time since the desert, the sound didn't feel like memory. It felt like peace. Why did the wind sound different that night? The base slept under a moonless sky. The ocean was restless again, not in fury, but in warning. It hissed against the shoreline like something alive, whispering to those who knew how to listen. Haley Brooks was still awake. Her desk light glowed dimly in the corner of her quarters. The notebook lay open, half a page filled with neat, deliberate handwriting. She'd been writing about awareness, how silence sharpens instinct, how fear blurs it, but her pen hovered, unfinished. Something in the air felt wrong. A vibration, faint, distant, moved through the floor. Not thunder, not machinery, different. She stood, boots already laced, her movements practiced. Years of experience had trained her to respond first, think later. Moments later, the alarm sounded. Attention, incoming distress call. Training vessel capsized 3 kilometers offshore. All available personnel report to Bay 2. Her door was open before the second announcement finished. By the time she reached the hangar, Commander Merrick and Captain Cole were already there. Floodlights painted the interior in harsh white. Mechanics scrambled around a helicopter being prepped for launch. The air was chaos, shouted orders, clanging tools, the metallic thump of doors slamming shut. Merrick looked up as she approached. "Brooks, you're flying." Her voice was steady, understood how many souls. "7," he said. "Training vessel Alpha 7. Night navigation drill. Sudden mechanical failure. We've got partial coordinates, but comms are down." Cole handed her a tablet displaying a shifting map, red dots blinking erratically over blue grids. "These signals are unstable. 2 life beacons still transmitting, the others intermittent." Haley studied it briefly. "Winds are increasing, visibility's dropping. We go low altitude or we lose thermal contact." Merrick gave a grim nod. "You pick your team." She didn't hesitate. Martinez for navigation, Rivers for line support, Dempsey for extraction relay. Kyle, standing nearby, looked startled. "Us." "You wanted to learn," she said simply. "Now you do it for real." Minutes later, the helicopter lifted into the dark. The blades roared, slicing through fog and wind. Inside the cockpit, red instrument lights reflected off focused faces. The storm wasn't violent yet, but it was building. The sea below churned like black glass breaking itself apart. Haley's hands were steady on the controls. The rhythmic hum of the rotor was her heartbeat, the instruments her pulse. "Martinez, what's the thermal reading?" "Faint," he replied, squinting at his monitor. "I'm getting 2 solid signatures, maybe 3 fluctuating. Coordinates shifting west with the current." "Rivers, prepare harness lines. Dempsey, keep beacon range open." The team moved efficiently. No jokes this time, no swagger, just purpose. The searchlight cut across the waves, white streaks against endless dark. "Nothing." Haley scanned the horizon, narrowing her eyes. Adjust 2 degrees starboard, she ordered. There's a current drift pattern forming off the northern shelf. If they capsize there, debris will follow the flow line. Kyle adjusted. Copy that. The helicopter banked left, sweeping low over the angry water. Then a flash. Visual contact, Dempsey shouted. Orange marker, 10 o'clock. Haley's eyes locked on the faint glimmer of an emergency light bobbing among the waves. Hold altitude. Rivers, harness ready. Ready. The sea beneath them boiled with wind and rain. The helicopter hovered, rotors kicking up spray. 2 figures clung to a capsized hull, barely moving. Haley lowered the bird with surgical precision. Rivers, you're on descent, double clip. You've got 30 seconds. Rivers hooked in and vanished into the dark below. Hold it steady, Kyle muttered, his knuckles white on the navigation panel. Haley's voice stayed calm, even as wind buffeted the aircraft. Hold your breathing, Martinez. Machines listen better when you do. Through the rain-streaked glass, she watched Rivers reach the survivors, one conscious, one limp. 2 secured, his voice crackled through comms. Copy, bring them up. The winch groaned as weight pulled against it. The helicopter dipped slightly, then steadied. One by one, the survivors came into view, drenched, shivering, faces pale with shock. Haley kept her gaze forward. Thermal scan, any others? Kyle hesitated, negative on solid reads. Wait, his eyes widened. There, faint signal, northwest, maybe 50 meters. Haley adjusted instantly, veering toward the direction. Line 2 ready. Rivers didn't hesitate. He hooked in again and dropped into the dark. The seconds that followed felt endless. Rain blurred everything into motion. Then static over comms. Got one, but she's caught, debris pinning her leg. Haley's jaw tightened. Hold position. The wind screamed through the cockpit, trying to shove the aircraft off balance. Alarms blinked. Warnings flashed. Altitude warning, Kyle said urgently. Waves are rising fast. Haley didn't move. Hold it. Rivers' voice came again, strained with effort. Almost clear, she's free. Bring them up. The winch screamed under tension, cable vibrating against the gale. The final 2 figures rose out of the darkness, Rivers supporting a young recruit, barely conscious. Haley's eyes flicked to the monitor, all accounted for. Then she saw it. The fuel gauge, dropping faster than it should. Kyle noticed too. We've got a leak in secondary feed. Seal it and reroute flow, she said calmly. We're still 3 clicks from base. He hesitated. We might not make it. Her tone didn't change. We will. They flew in silence, the storm clawing at them, the helicopter groaning against invisible hands. Lightning flashed somewhere behind them, turning the sea silver for half a heartbeat. Then land. The floodlights of the base cut through the fog like salvation. When the skids touched the ground, the relief was so sudden it felt unreal. The hangar crew swarmed the helicopter. Medics rushed in, pulling the soaked survivors onto stretchers. Rivers stumbled out last, drenched and shaking. He gave Haley a weary salute. All 5 alive, ma'am. She nodded. Good work. Merrick approached, shouting over the noise. That was textbook impossible, Brooks. She stepped down from the cockpit, her boots hitting the wet concrete. Just work, she said. Then she looked at the survivors, the youngest one, the girl Rivers had saved, still half conscious, whispering something to a medic. Haley caught it faintly. She told me, steady, silent. The words hit her like a heartbeat in reverse. Those same words, the ones that once belonged to Ken, the ones she'd carried into every storm since. Haley turned away, blinking hard. Merrick's hand landed gently on her shoulder. You good? She nodded once. Yeah, just tired. But she was not really. She was remembering. The base cafeteria was nearly empty when she finally sat down. A paper cup of coffee steamed beside her, untouched. The rain had stopped, leaving only the faint drip of water from the roof outside. Kyle joined her quietly. "Mind if I sit?" She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat, fidgeted for a moment, then said, "You saved 5 people tonight." She didn't look up. "We saved 5 people." He smiled faintly. "You could have let command handle it. They would have called it too risky." Haley's gaze was distant. "Sometimes command doesn't have time to think. Sometimes you just move." Kyle nodded slowly. "That recruit, the girl, she said you told her those words. Steady, silent." Haley's lips curved just slightly. She listened. He leaned back, studying her. "You ever think maybe you were meant to be here, teaching, leading, doing this?" She met his eyes. "Maybe, but being meant for something doesn't make it easy." He chuckled softly. "No, but it makes it worth it." They sat in silence after that, not awkward silence, but the kind that settles like calm water after a storm. Finally, Haley stood. "Get some rest, Martinez." He saluted. "Yes, ma'am." She turned toward the window. Outside, dawn was breaking, the sky painted in soft gold, the sea calm again. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Tired eyes, steady shoulders, a small line of ink barely visible beneath her sleeve. She raised her wrist, pulling the fabric back just enough to see it fully. The faded characters looked different now, not like a wound, but like a compass. Each mark still represented a name, a loss, a story unfinished. But maybe, just maybe, tonight had added something new. Not another mark. A reason to keep going. Later that morning, Commander Merrick found her on the observation deck overlooking the coast. She stood alone, hair pulled tight, hands resting on the railing as the wind tugged at her jacket. He walked up beside her, saying nothing at first. They watched the ocean together, its waves calmer, gentler. Finally, he said, "You know, Brooks, if Ken could see what you've done with his words." She didn't turn. "He'd probably tell me I was doing it wrong." Merrick chuckled quietly. "Yeah, he probably would." A pause, then his tone softened. "But he'd be proud, I know I am." Haley's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Thank you, sir." They stood in companionable silence. Below them, recruits were already gathering for morning drills. The base was waking again, boots on gravel, voices rising, orders called. Life continuing as it always did. Merrick adjusted his cap. "Command's reviewing last night's op. They'll call it a success, but between us it was more than that." "How so?" He looked at her. "Because last night they didn't just follow your orders, they followed your example." She turned to face him finally, her voice soft but certain. Then maybe the silence finally spoke loud enough. He smiled. Maybe it did. As he walked away, Haley looked back out at the sea one last time. The horizon shimmered with light, endless and open. Somewhere out there, beyond the line where the water met the sky, lay the memories she'd been carrying for years. She touched her wrist gently, not to hide it this time, but to feel the heartbeat beneath it. It was still there, strong, steady, silent. And for the first time, she realized those words weren't just a command. They were a promise. Why did trust always come with a price? 3 weeks had passed since the rescue. The sea had calmed. The compound had returned to its rhythm, drills at dawn, field tests at dusk, but something subtle had shifted. Everywhere Haley went, conversations hushed. Salutes came sharper. Recruits whispered her name not in gossip but in reverence. To them, she wasn't just an instructor anymore. She was the one who brought people home. But to Haley, that was the problem. Because reverence could turn into distance, just as fast as respect could turn into fear. She built her command on silence, on the belief that actions meant more than words. Now, people treated her silence like mystery instead of discipline. They didn't realize silence could also be loneliness. She was reviewing mission footage in the control room when the door opened quietly behind her. It was Captain Cole. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried the kind of weight that came before bad news. "Brooks, we need to talk." Haley turned off the monitor. "What happened?" Cole hesitated. Last night's drone surveillance recorded something unusual on the southern perimeter. A recon unit training patrol went off course. Unauthorized deviation from the route. Haley frowned. Who was in charge of the patrol? Cole paused. "Martinez." The air between them froze. "He claims it was equipment malfunction," Cole continued. "Telemetry says otherwise. He powered down GPS manually for 8 minutes. Haley's pulse steadied, but her voice dropped a note lower. "Did he give a reason?" "He hasn't yet. Command's scheduling an inquiry." Haley leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "He's not reckless. He doesn't move without purpose." Cole's tone was soft, but firm. "Even good soldiers make bad choices when they think no one's watching." Haley stared at the screen again, the paused frame of the drone feed. Dark terrain, the flicker of motion, the faint heat signature of a human form where it shouldn't have been. "Where did he go?" she asked. "Out past the marker fence, into restricted ground." That hit harder than she expected. Restricted meant experimental zones, sensor-laden areas where classified tests were run, far above their clearance. Cole closed the folder she'd been holding. "Merrick wants you present at the debrief. He requested you specifically." Haley nodded once. "When?" 30 minutes. The briefing room felt colder than usual. Kyle sat at the far end of the table, eyes fixed on nothing, uniform disheveled from a long night. His hands were clasped tight enough to turn his knuckles white. Commander Merrick stood near the tactical display, back straight, expression carved from stone. Cole sat quietly beside him, her presence steady but watchful. When Haley entered, Kyle looked up, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw fear there. Not of punishment, of disappointment. "Sit, Brooks," Merrick said. She did, folding her hands neatly in front of her. Merrick spoke without preamble. At 2300 hours during a standard recon route, Martinez disengaged GPS tracking and crossed the southern perimeter. 8 minutes later, he reactivated his system and returned to the route. He reported no incident, no contact, no cause. His eyes shifted to Kyle. "You have one chance to explain, make it count." Kyle swallowed. "Sir, I wasn't trying to hide anything. I saw movement outside the perimeter. Looked like a signal flare. I thought maybe a local fishing vessel went down or—" Cole cut him off gently. "So you went alone?" Kyle nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Without notifying command?" "Yes, ma'am." Merrick's tone hardened. "You realize you breached both protocol and restricted territory." "I know, sir. I thought someone might need help." Haley's voice entered the conversation like a blade sliding through cloth, calm, precise. "Did you find anything?" Kyle turned toward her, eyes pleading. "No, ma'am. Just an empty beacon washed ashore. Thought it might be one of ours, but it was." "Then why lie on your report?" she asked quietly. He looked down. "Because I knew they'd see it as negligence, not intention." Haley's silence was sharp enough to make him flinch. Merrick exhaled. "You broke procedure during an active protocol window. Command has grounds for suspension." Kyle's jaw clenched. "Understood, sir." Merrick looked at Haley. "You trained him, you decide." The room went still. Even Cole's eyes widened. "Commander." "It's her call," Merrick said firmly. "She made him a soldier, let's see what kind." Haley didn't answer immediately. She just looked at Kyle, really looked at him. He sat there like the boy he used to be, not the soldier he'd become. The one who used to laugh too loudly. The one who'd mocked her tattoo. The one who'd followed her into a storm and never faltered. Now he was facing a different kind of storm. The kind made not of rain or bullets, but choices. Finally she spoke. "Clear the room." Merrick gave a slow nod. 5 minutes, then I want an answer. When the door shut, the silence grew heavy. Kyle's voice broke first. Ma'am, I swear I wasn't trying to. Stop, she said softly. Just breathe. He obeyed, taking a shaky breath. She stood, packing slowly around the table. You saw a flare. You thought someone needed help. You acted without clearance. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. Would you do it again? He hesitated. Yes. She turned toward him, even knowing it could cost your career. Yes. Her gaze softened. Good. He blinked. Ma'am. Good, she repeated, because instinct isn't a flaw, it's what saves lives, but untempered instinct kills just as easily. He frowned. So, you're not recommending suspension? She walked closer, stopping beside him. No, but you'll spend the next 2 weeks under my direct supervision. Every mission, every drill, every debrief. You'll learn the difference between courage and impulse. He exhaled shakily. Yes, ma'am. She leaned in slightly. And you'll write a report not for command, for yourself. I want every thought, every hesitation, every reason why you did what you did. Because if you can't explain your choices to yourself, you'll never explain them to anyone else. Kyle nodded, understood. When Merrick and Cole returned, Haley's voice was composed again. No suspension, remedial training under my command. Merrick studied her for a long moment, then nodded. So ordered. As Kyle left the room, Cole lingered behind. You just saved his career, she said quietly. Haley shook her head. No, he'll do that himself. I just gave him the chance. Cole smiled faintly. You sound like Merrick. Maybe he's rubbing off on me. When Cole was gone, Merrick stayed behind, closing the folder slowly. You know command will question your leniency. I'm not lenient, she said. I'm precise. He chuckled softly. You ever going to admit you're becoming the best damn leader this unit's had? She met his gaze evenly. Leaders don't say that about themselves, sir. He smiled. That's why you are one. That night Haley walked the perimeter alone. The ocean air was sharp with salt and cold mist. Beyond the fence, the horizon was a line of silver under a dark sky. She stopped near the training field where it all began, where laughter had once followed her, where silence had once felt like exile. Now the silence felt different. It felt earned. She looked down at her wrist. The ink had faded more, the black turning to gray. She traced each mark slowly, whispering the names under her breath. Ken Rourke Janes. 12 in total. Her thumb paused on the space she'd left blank. She thought of Kyle, reckless, loyal, stubbornly human. She thought of the recruits learning what silence meant. She thought of the girl they'd rescued, whispering those same words through cold lips, steady, silent. And she finally understood what Ken had meant all those years ago, that leadership wasn't about commanding others. It was about carrying them. Her radio crackled suddenly. Brooks, this is Cole, you still awake? Haley smiled faintly. Always. Thought so, Cole's voice came back, warm even through static. Just wanted to say that report from Martinez. You were right. There was a flare. Old distress beacon from an abandoned buoy. Malfunctioned during the storm. He didn't imagine it. Haley's eyes lifted toward the horizon. Good to know. Thought you'd want closure. I already had it. A pause, then Cole's voice softened. You're changing this place, you know, not with rules, with example. Haley didn't answer immediately. The wind moved her hair slightly, carrying the scent of the sea. Finally, she said, change doesn't happen because people listen to you. It happens because they start hearing themselves. Cole chuckled. You always talk like that. Only when people ask. They both laughed quietly. When the channel went silent again, Haley stood there for a long while, watching the waves crash gently against the shore. The night no longer felt lonely. Because somewhere out there, beyond the water, beyond the noise, beyond the past, Her fallen team was listening. Not to words, to silence. And in that silence, they were finally at peace. Why did endings always feel like beginnings in disguise? The day began with sunlight rare and golden, spreading over the compound in soft ribbons. The sea was calm again, its rhythm patient, unhurried. The drills had ended early that morning. The recruits were dismissed. The hum of the bass had softened to something peaceful, a quiet too fragile to disturb. Haley Brooks stood on the tarmac, wind brushing strands of hair against her cheek. A transport aircraft waited nearby, its engines idle, wings gleaming in the light. A deployment order. She'd known it was coming. When command called for a field commander for Operation Meridian, a joint task mission off the eastern archipelago, Merrick hadn't even needed to ask. He just looked at her across the table and said, "It's yours, Brooks." And she'd nodded. Now, as the last of her gear was loaded, she felt that familiar stillness before movement, the calm between heartbeat and breath. Captain Cole approached, a small envelope in hand. "Transfer clearance," she said, offering it. "They want you in the air within the hour." Haley took it, sliding it into her jacket pocket. "Any details?" Cole shrugged. "Minimal intel, search and secure. Possible insurgent recon, possible civilian interference. You'll get the full brief in flight." "Standard gray op," Haley said quietly. Cole nodded, then her tone softened. "You'll have Martinez on the flight crew." Haley glanced up. "You sure?" "He requested it, said he doesn't want to fly without you." A faint smile curved Haley's lips. "Then he's learning." Cole chuckled. "Yeah, he is." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them filled with mutual respect, the kind that didn't need words anymore. Then Cole said, "You know, there's something funny about this place." Haley raised a brow. "Funny?" Cole nodded toward the recruits drilling across the yard. "They used to compete to be loudest. Now they compete to be calmest. You did that." Haley looked out at the field, the young faces, the disciplined precision, the steady rhythm of boots on concrete. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Cole smiled. "Figures, even now you let silence do the talking." Haley smirked faintly. "It's reliable." Cole saluted her then, crisp, firm, genuine. "Safe flight, Commander." Haley returned it with quiet grace. "Hold the fort, Captain." And with that she turned toward the aircraft. The flight was smooth at first. Clouds rolled past like soft gray walls, sunlight flickering between them. The horizon stretched endlessly, the ocean below gleaming like a sheet of glass. Haley sat near the cockpit, headset on, eyes scanning data feeds. Martinez sat beside her, focused on flight control, his posture more confident now, shaped by lessons he'd bled for. "ETA 22 minutes, he said. "No radar contact, no interference." "Copy," Haley replied. For a long time they flew in silence, the kind that wasn't awkward but full, comfortable, earned. Then Martinez spoke quietly. "Ma'am." "Yes." He hesitated, then said, "That day when I broke protocol, I still think about it. Not because of what I did wrong, but because you didn't yell. You didn't punish. You just made me think." Haley turned slightly toward him. "That's the point. Discipline doesn't grow from fear, it grows from reflection." He nodded slowly. "I didn't get that before." "Most don't until they have to." A pause, then he asked softly, "How do you know when to forgive yourself?" The question lingered in the air. Haley looked out the window at the endless stretch of blue. "You don't," she said after a long silence. "You just learn to carry the weight without letting it crush you." He nodded, "Like you do." Her gaze flicked down to her wrist, the faded tattoo barely visible beneath her sleeve. "Like I try to." Before he could say more, the radio crackled. "Base to Meridian Flight 1. Be advised your LZ is shifting. New coordinates inbound. Terrain unstable, possible interference near the site. Haley took the transmission. Copy that base, adjusting course to grid C9. Martinez reprogrammed the nav. That's near the old ridge sector. Didn't know it was still active. It isn't, Haley said quietly, which means someone doesn't want us there. As they approached, the weather changed. Clouds thickened, wind picked up. Hold steady, Haley ordered. Through the haze, shapes began to form, jagged cliffs, dense trees, waves crashing violently against the rocks below. Then a flash. Contact, Martinez shouted. Unidentified object at 12 o'clock. Haley's eyes snapped up. Flare. No, heat signature, small, moving. Could be drone interference. She scanned the sensors. No lock, might be passive surveillance. Then static again, followed by a garbled voice. This is Echo Unit. Request assistance. Martinez's eyes widened. That's not one of ours. Haley frowned. Patch it through. The voice repeated, clearer this time, female, strained, desperate. This is Echo 7. We're pinned near the Ridge 2, wounded, signal failing. Haley's hand was already on the comm. Echo 7, this is Meridian Flight 1. We read you, sending coordinates. No response. The signal cut. Martinez looked at her. Orders. She didn't hesitate. We're going in. The helicopter dove toward the ridge, engines roaring. The wind screamed around them, rain hammering against the canopy. Visibility poor, terrain unstable. But Haley's voice was calm, almost soft. Steady, Martinez, stay with me. They broke through the mist and saw it. A small crash site near the tree line, smoke rising, two figures dragging a third away from burning debris. Haley grabbed her headset. I've got visual on survivors, prepare descent. They hovered low, the rope dropped, Haley clipped in. Stay with the bird, she said. Martinez protested, ma'am, protocol. Steady, she said, silent. And then she was gone, into the wind, into the rain. The ground hit hard. She rolled, came up in a crouch, rifle ready. Echo 7, she called. This is Commander Brooks, Navy Spec, respond. A voice answered faintly, here. She ran toward it, boots slipping in mud, smoke stinging her eyes. Two women in partial gear crouched beside a wounded soldier, a pilot, bleeding from a leg wound. Haley knelt beside him, assessing the damage. You're stable, we're getting you out. The older of the two survivors looked up. Recognition flickered in her eyes. Commander Brooks. Haley blinked. Do I know you? Lieutenant Reeve. We trained under Merrick, Valkyrie Recon, sir. The words hit like a ghost. Valkyrie Recon. Haley's throat tightened. You're alive. Reeve nodded weakly. Barely. We were running recovery ops when we were hit by debris. They called us Echo to mask the op. Haley's pulse quickened. How many? 3, 1 KIA, 1 injured. Haley's voice softened. Let's get you home. They made it back to the helicopter through rain and wind, the world around them breaking apart in sound and fury. When they lifted off, Haley looked down at the burning wreck, at the ridge, at the ghosts of a past she thought she'd buried. Martinez glanced at her, brow furrowed. You okay, ma'am? She nodded slowly. Yeah. But inside she was. Because Reeve's voice, those few broken words, had reopened a door she'd sealed years ago. Valkyrie Recon. Her team, her ghosts. Alive. Back at base, medics rushed the injured to triage. The others were debriefed immediately. Merrick found Haley outside the hangar, drenched but still standing tall. Report, he said. She handed him the data drive. Recovered survivors from downed recon craft, partial Valkyrie identifiers. Merrick froze. That's not possible. I thought so too. He took a deep breath, looking out toward the horizon. Then maybe the past isn't done with us yet. Haley's gaze followed his. It never is. They stood there a long time, watching the medics move, the recruits working in silence, the world turning on as if nothing had changed. Finally, Merrick said softly, "You brought them home again, Brooks." She looked at him, eyes steady, voice quiet. "It wasn't heroism, sir. It was duty." He smiled faintly. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." That night, Haley sat alone on the observation deck. The notebook lay open in her lap, pages fluttering in the wind. She wrote slowly, each word deliberate. Today, silence came full circle. They used to laugh at what they didn't understand. A tattoo, a memory, a language written in loss. But now they speak it too, in how they move, how they act, how they serve. She paused, then continued. Maybe strength was never about power or noise. Maybe it was about listening to yourself, to your ghosts, to the quiet voice that tells you when enough is enough. She stopped writing, looking out at the sea, endless, calm, infinite. Then she rolled up her sleeve and looked at her wrist. The ink was fading fast now. But maybe that was the point. Because what mattered wasn't that it lasted. It was that it meant something while it did. She traced her finger over the blank space, the one she'd left open all those years ago. And for the first time, she filled it in. Not with a name. With a single word. Still. She smiled faintly, steady, silent, still. The wind moved gently around her, carrying the echo of voices long gone. Ken's voice, faint but steady, seemed to drift through memory. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She closed her notebook, then stood facing the horizon, posture straight, eyes clear. The SEAL commander stood at the far end of the deck, watching her. When she turned, he snapped to attention, not out of duty but respect. This time no one laughed. Because now everyone understood. Moral reflection, final line for voiceover close. Sometimes silence isn't the absence of words, it's the presence of meaning. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.